Philip tiredly looked up from the pile of bills on the kitchen table. Each of them reminded him of the hopeless situation he was in. 3 years ago, when his mother fell ill, he never imagined that treatment would be so expensive. "Mr. Reynolds," the bank manager's voice was still in his head, "you've missed your second payment. If the situation does not change, we will be forced to—" Philip stood up abruptly from the table, as if trying to push away unpleasant memories. "I'll pay everything, damn it, interest by interest." He went to the window. Behind the glass, evening Boston was getting ready for bed, but not him. He had another night shift ahead of him. His phone vibrated, a message from the nursing home. "Mr. Reynolds, we'd like to remind you that you need to pay for additional procedures for your mother. The patient's condition requires—" Philip didn't read any further. He grabbed his car keys and left the apartment. In the elevator, he met Mrs. Thompson from the third floor. "Back to work again, Philip?" she asked sympathetically. "You've been working so hard lately. The bills won't pay themselves," he tried to joke, but it didn't work. The evening city greeted him with rain. The first few hours passed as usual: drunken students, couples after dinner in a restaurant, tired office workers. Around 11 o'clock, he noticed a young woman at the entrance to the business center. "Do you need a taxi?" Philip rolled down his window. The girl raised her crying face. "Yes, please. Oak Park Drive." There was a heavy silence in the car. Philip could see in the mirror how she was trying to hold back her tears. "You know," she suddenly spoke, "I worked for this company for 3 years. 3 years. And today they just told me to pack my things." "It always happens unexpectedly," Philip replied gently. "I don't even know how to buy medicine for Michael now." Her voice trembled. "My son is 6. He has asthma. The insurance was corporate." Philip tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "What's your name?" "Nicole Wilson. And I'm Philip. And you know, Nicole, I understand you better than you think." She wiped away her tears. "Really?" "Yes. Life sometimes puts us in difficult situations, but it's worth fighting, especially when you have someone to fight for." They arrived at the house. Nicole started looking for her wallet. "No need," Philip shook his head. "Tonight's on the house." "But why?" She looked surprised. Philip remembered all his debts, bills, and loans. "Because sometimes we all need a little support. Take care of yourself, Nicole." She looked at him for a long time, then said quietly, "Thank you, Philippe. You have no idea how much that means to me today." On the way back to the base, he thought about her words. He may have earned less today, but for the first time in a long time, he felt not just like a taxi driver drowning in debt, but like a person who was able to help someone. 2 weeks after that evening, Nicole stood in front of the mirror in the new office of Baker Investments. She still couldn't believe her luck. After sending out dozens of resumes and interviewing for a number of jobs, she was offered a position as a senior financial advisor with a salary that was almost double her previous salary. "Nicole, do you have a minute?" Lauren, her new boss, appeared in the doorway. "Sure." Nicole quickly straightened her jacket. "How are you enjoying your first week with us?" Lauren sat down on the edge of the desk. "Are you settling in?" Nicole smiled sincerely. "Everything is great. I'm so grateful for this opportunity." "You know," Lauren looked at her carefully, "when I saw your resume, I knew you were exactly what we needed, and now I see that I was right." After work, Nicole hurried to the hospital. It was time for Michael's monthly checkup. She was waiting for the doctor in the hallway when she suddenly heard a familiar voice. "Mom, please, you have to take your medicine." Nicole turned around and froze. Philip, the same taxi driver who had refused to take her money, was standing by the window. He was holding the hand of an elderly woman who was resisting. "I don't want these pills. They're bitter," she said capriciously. "Mrs. Reynolds," the nurse said gently, "it's very important for your health." Philip looked tired and exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes and his shoulders were slumped. "Philippe," Nicole called softly. He turned around and his eyes widened in surprise. Nicole? What are you doing here? A regular checkup for my son, and you… Mom, he sighed. She has Alzheimer's disease. It's been getting worse lately. Mrs. Reynolds suddenly started to cry. I want to go home. Where is my home? Why are you keeping me here? Philip hugged his mother. Mom, this is only temporary. You'll be back home soon. You're lying! You're all lying! She pushed him away and ran down the hall. Mom! Philip ran after her. Nicole ran after her without hesitation. They found Mrs. Reynolds in the hospital garden. She was sitting on a bench looking at the flowers. It's beautiful here, she said calmly, as if nothing had happened. It reminds me of our old garden. Philip sank down beside her, powerless. Yes, Mom, it is very similar. When the nurse took Mrs. Reynolds back to her room, Nicole and Philip stayed in the garden. I'm sorry you had to witness that, he said tiredly. Don't apologize. It's hard to take care of sick parents. Philip smiled bitterly. You know, that's not the worst part. The worst part is feeling helpless. The medical bills are growing every month. I've already sold my father's car, pawned my watch. And the insurance. It doesn't cover even half of the costs. I had to take out a loan. He ran his hand over his face. Now I work 16 hours a day, but I still can't keep up with the interest. Nicole sat down next to him. How much? What? How much do you owe? Philippe was silent for a long time, then said quietly, 75,000. And that's not including the current costs of keeping you in the clinic. Nicole whistled. That's a lot of money. Have you tried debt restructuring? What? Restructuring? There are various programs. She suddenly fell silent. Sorry, it's a professional habit. I work as a financial consultant. Philip looked at her curiously. So you found a new job? Yes, she smiled. And you know, partly thanks to you. Thanks to me? That night, your words about not giving up. They helped me gather my strength and continue my search. They sat in the garden for a long time, talking. Nicole talked about her new job, about how Michael was feeling better thanks to the new medication. Philip shared stories about his mother, about how she used to be, an energetic math teacher who adored her students. You know, Nicole suddenly said, I could help you with your finances. It's the least I can do in return. No. What are you… Philip began. Don't even argue, she interrupted. You helped me when I was desperate. Now it's my turn. At that moment, a nurse approached them. Mr. Reynolds, your mother has fallen asleep. You can rest until morning. Philip looked at his watch. I have to go to work. Give me your phone number, Nicole said firmly. I'll call you tomorrow and we'll discuss your finances. He hesitated but then took out the taxi driver's business card. Thank you, just thank you. Don't thank me, Nicole smiled. You know, sometimes the hardest thing is to accept help from others, but sometimes that's what saves us. As Philip drove to work, he felt strangely elated. For the first time in a long time, he had hope that maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. Nicole stayed in the garden for a few more minutes. She looked at the flowers and thought about the strange twists and turns of fate. Who would have thought that a random taxi ride would lead to such a meeting, and that now she would be able to thank the person who helped her in her time of need? Nicole was concentrating on the papers laid out on the table in the coffee shop. It was the third time she had recalculated the numbers, trying to find the best solution. More coffee? The waitress asked. Yes, please. And for my friend, too. Nicole looked at her watch. Philippe was due to arrive any minute. The bell above the door announced the new visitor. Philip looked tired after his night shift, but there was hope in his eyes. Sorry I'm late, he said as he sat down. My last client. It's okay, Nicole interrupted him. I have a plan for you. She pulled out a folder of documents. Look, I've analyzed your situation. Right now, you are paying too much interest on your loan, but there is a way to change that. What is it? Philippe leaned closer. We can consolidate all your debts into one loan with a lower interest rate. Baker Investments has a special program. Suddenly, the door of the coffee shop opened sharply, and a tall man approached their table. So, this is where you've been hiding, brother. Philip tensed up. Robert, what are you doing here? My mother called. She said you missed last month's payment again. Robert turned his attention to Nicole. Who's this? Nicole Wilson, the financial advisor. She held out her hand. Robert ignored her gesture. A financial consultant? Really, Phil? You're going to see a financial advisor now? Robert warned Philip. No, listen to me. Robert raised his voice. I offered you money, but you were so proud. And now what? You trust some stranger? Nicole calmly folded the papers. Mr. Reynolds, I understand your concern, but you don't understand anything, Robert thundered. This is a family matter. Enough. Philip stood up abruptly. You have no right. I have no right, Robert interrupted him. Do you have the right to refuse the help of your family? Do you have the right to trust strangers more than your own brother? The cafe patrons began to look back at them. Philip felt himself blushing with shame. I'm sorry, Nicole. I'd better go. Philip, wait, she called, but he had already left the coffee shop. Robert smiled victoriously. And you, Miss Consultant, I advise you to stay out of our family affairs. When he left, Nicole sat for a long time, staring at her unfinished coffee. The plan was almost ready, but she hadn't taken into account one thing: family pride. The next day, Philip didn't answer her calls. She wrote several messages, but received no response. Only in the evening did she receive a short one. Sorry about the scene in the coffee shop. We'd better forget about it. Nicole felt everything inside her shrink. She couldn't just give up, not after she saw a real chance to help. She stayed late at the office, reworking the plan. She had to find a different approach, something that wouldn't hurt Philip and his brother's pride. Still working? Lauren appeared in the doorway. Yes, a personal project. Nicole rubbed her tired eyes. Lauren came closer and looked at the papers. Debt restructuring? For a client? Nicole hesitated but then told the whole story. Lauren listened carefully. Maybe there's another way. What if... Their conversation was interrupted by a phone call. Nicole looked at the screen. The hospital number. Hello, Miss Wilson? The nurse's voice sounded concerned. Do you know Philip Reynolds? Yes. What's going on? His mother. She's having a seizure. Mr. Reynolds asked me to call you back. He can't leave work, and his brother isn't answering his phone. Nicole felt her heart skip a beat. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The hospital was in chaos. Mrs. Reynolds was screaming and refusing treatment. The nurses tried to calm her down, but to no avail. Where is my son? Where is Philip? She screamed. I want to go home. Nicole went to the bedside. Mrs. Reynolds, I'm a friend of Philip's. He will be here soon. The elderly woman looked at her with blurry eyes. Really? Yes, Nicole replied softly. He's always been so caring. Mrs. Reynolds suddenly calmed down. Even when he was little. He once sold his bicycle to buy me a birthday present. Nicole took her hand. Tell me about it. When Philip came running in an hour later, out of breath, his mother was sleeping peacefully, and Nicole was sitting next to her, holding her hand. What happened? He whispered. Everything is fine now, Nicole answered just as quietly. We were just talking. Philip sank down into a chair, powerless. I didn't know who to call. Robert wasn't answering his phone, and I couldn't leave a client in the middle of the road. It's okay, Nicole interrupted him. I'm glad I could help. They sat in silence in the room, listening to Mrs. Reynolds' calm breathing. Finally, Philip said, I'm sorry about yesterday. Robert, he's not a bad guy. He's just very short-tempered. I understand, Nicole nodded. But Sometimes help can come from the places we least expect. A winter morning greeted Philip with an alarming call from the hospital. He was just finishing his night shift when the phone vibrated in his pocket. "Mr. Reynolds," the nurse on duty sounded tense. "You need to come in right away. Your mother is deteriorating badly. Her heart has skipped a beat. What happened?" "Mrs. Reynolds fell during the night. She has severe bruising and a suspected fracture. The doctor insists on further examination." Philip felt the ground slipping away from under his feet. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The attending physician met him in the hospital corridor. "Mr. Reynolds, we need to talk. How is she?" Philip tried to look into the room. "She is stable, but the situation is serious." The doctor took him aside. "In addition to the injuries from the fall, we found a significant deterioration in her general condition. He needs an urgent correction of treatment." "What exactly?" "New drugs, additional procedures." The doctor took out a folder. "Here's a list of what you need, and the cost." Philip ran his eyes over the numbers and felt his legs go weak. This is impossible. I don't have that kind of money." "I understand," the doctor sighed. "But without this treatment, your mother's condition will only get worse." In the ward, Mrs. Reynolds lay pale and small on the hospital bed. When Philip approached, she barely opened her eyes. "Philip, is that you?" "Yes, Mom." He took her hand. "I'm here. I'm scared," she whispered. "I don't know where I am." "Everything will be fine," he said, trying to keep his voice from trembling. "You're going to get better." In the hallway, he pulled out his phone. His fingers shook as he dialed his brother's number. "Robert, I need your help." "What? The counselor didn't help?" his brother replied sarcastically. "Stop it!" Philip's voice broke. "My mom is in critical condition. We need money for treatment." There was a long pause. "How much?" When Philip named the amount, Robert whistled. "That's unrealistic. I'm having problems with my business right now. I'm barely staying afloat. But you said—" "That was before," Robert interrupted him. "I can't do it now. I'm sorry." Philip stood leaning against the wall for a long time after his brother hung up. Hopelessness was overwhelming him. Suddenly the phone vibrated. A message from Nicole. "How's Mom? I heard about the fall." He didn't want to answer, but his fingers typed the text. "Bad. She needs urgent treatment." Half an hour later, Nicole was already in the hospital. "Tell me everything." Philip showed her the list of medications and the bill. She studied the documents carefully. "I can help." "No," he shook his head. "I'm not taking your money. Listen," Nicole looked him in the eye. "Baker Investments has a charity fund to help people in critical situations. I've already spoken to the management." "You told them about me?" Philip felt himself blushing with shame. "Only what was necessary. They're willing to help." "I can't accept—" "You can, and you must," Nicole said sharply. "Stop thinking about your pride. Think of your mother." Philip flinched at her tone. In the room, Mrs. Reynolds called to him again. "Philip, where are you?" "Coming, Mom." He turned to Nicole. "Let me think about it." The next few days turned into a nightmare. Mrs. Reynolds' condition was deteriorating, and the doctors insisted on starting a new treatment immediately. Nicole came to the hospital every day. She brought home-cooked meals for Philip, talked to Mrs. Reynolds when she came to. One evening she found Philip in tears in the hospital corridor. "I can't take it anymore," he whispered. "I failed her. I failed my mom." "No," Nicole said firmly. "You are the best son anyone could ever ask for. But right now, you need help, and there's no shame in that." In her office, a team of lawyers was already preparing the documents. Lauren was personally overseeing the process. "We're going to help," she told Nicole. "Stories like this don't have to end tragically because of lack of money." Finally, after a sleepless night, Philip called Nicole. "I agree. For my mom's sake, I accept your help." "Thank you," she replied quietly. "Thank you for trusting me." The same day, the new treatment began. Mrs. Reynolds was transferred to a better ward and additional procedures were prescribed. In the evening, Philip sat by his mother's bedside, holding her hand. She slept peacefully for the first time in many days. In his pocket were documents from Baker Investments, confirmation of charitable assistance. Philip was sitting in the kitchen, rereading a note from Nicole that he had found in his mailbox a week ago. Dear Philip, that night in your taxi, I was completely desperate. You refused to take money, saying that sometimes we all need help. I will never forget that moment. You know, it often happens in life that goodness returns when you least expect it. I am grateful to fate that I was able to repay you by helping with debt restructuring and my mother's treatment. Now I know that the most important thing is not to be afraid to lend a helping hand and not to be ashamed to accept it. Take care of yourself and your mom, Nicole. A phone call interrupted his thoughts. Philippe, good morning. His mother's voice sounded calm. Are you coming today? Yes, Mom. How are you feeling? Better. The doctor says the new medicine is helping. Philip smiled. His mother's condition had indeed improved. She still had problems with her memory, but her seizures were less frequent and her mood was more stable. The doorbell rang. Robert stood on the doorstep. Hi, he said, looking uncomfortable. Can I come in? They sat down in the kitchen. Robert twirled a cup of coffee in his hands for a long time. You know, I was wrong. When I refused to help you, it's just that things weren't going well in the company, but I could have thought of something. Everything is fine, Philip answered. The main thing is that my mom is better now. Later that day, Philippe met Nicole outside the hospital. How are things at your new job? She asked. It's unusual to work the day shift, he smiled. But being a dispatcher is more relaxed than being a taxi driver, and the salary is stable. They sat down on a bench in the hospital garden. You know, Nicole said, our company is really thinking about setting up a small aid fund. Nothing big, but to support people in critical situations. That would be great, Philip nodded. At least a few families would get a chance. They were silent, watching the sun go down. Thank you, Philip said quietly, for everything. And thank you, Nicole replied, for that night in the taxi. Life was returning to normal. His mother was recovering, albeit slowly. And most importantly, Philip no longer felt alone in his struggle.